So some of the first sermons in the Christian church were dialogical. They were not monological. St. Augustine, for example, would do dialogues with the congregation, and then that's how they would proclaim and work through the scripture. And so we have started to do that here on Saturday night. And our guests tonight to help us think about our faith, our God through this text, are the Sayilgans. So would you welcome them up? And their adorable daughter.
You should sit, okay?
You realize she's so cute, they're not going to listen to anything you say.
Right.
So just to get started, let us know who you are, what you do, how you met.
That's a long story. So before starting, I want to thank Jason Micheli and you all. I mean, we want to thank all of you for allowing us to be in your holy sanctuary tonight. That's for us the greatest, sign of hospitality. And so my name is Zeyneb Sayilgan, and my husband Salih Sayilgan, he can introduce himself. But I'm a professor of Islamic theology and religious pluralism at Virginia Theological Seminary. If you ever wondered why the name of Seminary Road in Alexandria, it's because there's an Episcopal seminary. And so I'm the fake Episcopalian there. Now I consider myself a traditional devout Muslim. I was born and raised in Germany, but my parents are of Kurdish ethnicity, and they immigrated to Germany in the 70s. So dialogue was always an intrinsic part of my life. It was not avoidable. And after a while, I realized I don't want to avoid it. It became an academic vocation. It became my vocation of life. Because I realized that there are lots of misunderstandings and stereotypes and bias in both communities, Muslim and non-Muslim. So I think, as Christians would say, it was my call to serve God in this way and bring both communities a little bit together through, mutual understanding and lots of talking. And that's what, we try to do. We try to teach in the classroom, but we also try to learn from you and other non-Muslims what Muslims could do to improve the world, what can be their contribution, what are our shortcomings, and there are many, surely. And so that's a little bit about me.
She said you could talk for yourself, but then she didn't give you a chance.
Right.
No, that's good.
You see matriarchal rules in our family, right?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Micheli, for having us putting this program together. My name is Salih Sayilgan, and I was born and raised in eastern part of Turkey, same from a Kurdish family. And so basically, my studies or my work has taken me to many places around the globe, from Estonia to Canada to Tanzania, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and now in the state. So I would say that I came from a very local context, very small village, Kurdish village, to be part of a global conversation, and that's why I am here. And thank you for having us.
And so you work as a chaplain at Georgetown Hospital, is that right?
So basically the story, so until recent time, me and Zeynep, we were residential chaplains at Georgetown University. So not anymore. So it was a phase in our life. We served students of all religions or without religion, without faith, for 4 years. It was really a rewarding and enriching experience. But currently I am teaching at the Catholic University of America. So I teach Islam, Muslim scripture, world religions.
My wife went to Catholic University.
Oh, nice.
So that's good. So how did the two of you meet?
Okay.
Well, we met in the cosmopolitan city of Istanbul. Actually, as a graduate student, I was invited to a conference on theodicy, resurrection and afterlife. And he worked for an NGO at that time in Istanbul, which hosted scholars from around the world. And he was the one who had the honor to pick me up from the airport. And then it was a little bit love at first sight. We spent the time in the car talking to each other. I realized he asked more questions than I did, and then slowly we became friends, and then started emailing each other, and then in 2009 we got married, and that's the result.
And I should say Facebook was very helpful, just to
It's every Uber driver's dream is to...
I think what brought us together is our common vision. We have a common vision in our life, and if you love each other, for with the love of God and for greater cause, I think it really, brings the marriage to fruition and really blesses your life together.
So the scripture text that Ron read, Exodus 5, a lot of people forget. So the Israelites have been slaves for 400 years at that point in the story. But a lot of people forget that the Israelites didn't start out as slaves in Egypt, that originally they were immigrants. And if you read the opening chapter of Exodus, what prompts the slavery is concern that those immigrants are becoming too populous. And you hear Pharaoh say things like, "You lazy." So it's very loaded language that's easy to find a contemporary parallel with how we speak of immigrants and the other. So I thought it would be interesting because we talk so much about how Christians need to see Muslims as their neighbor, but we never ask the question, well, how do Muslims see their neighbors? And what motivates Muslim compassion for the stranger and the immigrant and the poor?
Yeah. I think just like if I may.
Yeah, immigration actually, Zeynep did her dissertation on immigration, so.
This is actually something that really, something dear to our hearts, because we are immigrants. We're always, even Salih in Turkey as a Kurdish minority, was always considered as a marginal, and still the marginalized member of societies, the outsider. But immigration is also at the heart of Islamic history, of the Islamic tradition. And many of you might know that, Islam in the very early, after 13 years of persecution in Mecca, the early members of the community, actually earlier, there was an earlier migration to Abyssinia where 83 members who, people who were marginalized, persecuted in their communities because they embraced the Muslim faith, all of a sudden find themselves, in another country. They had to migrate. It was forced migration to Abyssinia. So the Christian Negus at that time, today's Ethiopia, was the one who gave them refuge, who respected, that they were part of another tradition. And that's actually so vivid in the collective memory of Muslims that they actually never forget that immigration is always at the heart of their identity. So for us, it's really deeply meaningful that we came tonight in the sanctuary, but also knowing that this is something which is lived in our tradition, that Christians were the first community who actually embraced us, and that has been over and over interpreted and revitalized in our tradition. What does it mean that Prophet Muhammad sent his followers to the Christian king, right? And how are we to treat Christians? So that's really something. It's undeniable that there are Christian minorities, suffering persecution in Muslim countries. But we have to ask ourselves, this is a modern phenomenon, because in pre-modern times, not just Christians, but Muslim, Buddhists and Hindus, and if you look at India and Indonesia and Malaysia, not just Christians, but Hindus and Buddhists and people from other traditions lived amicably with Muslims, because they understood not just that Christians showed them hospitality and embrace, but they also had that Quranic vision to embrace others, and that they can never force people to convert, because it's, there's no sincerity in forceful conversion, because then you're not doing it for God, you're doing it for people. So as an immigrant myself, I'm, being raised in Germany, I was always the immigrant. I was always the outsider. Even though I was born in Germany, I'm fluent in German, It's always I'm the one on the margins. And you know what? At some point I came to embrace that identity because I think we approach immigrants as from a utilitarian perspective. How can they benefit us? How can they, enrich us? But they do enrich us in many ways, from my own experience. But also they provide a rich spiritual perspective to our lives. They are able to see from different angles, because they are not easily. They cannot be easily fitting into one society, and that's what I found myself. The spirituality of immigrants is so deep, really, because they really go, especially the virtue of hope is so strong. I mean, they go through so much suffering and hardship, and then they just not only take care of themselves, but also their other extended relatives, and there's such a great self-sacrifice. I mean, it's amazing. We don't really understand what they can benefit, how they can actually contribute to our spiritual lives. I think that's something which is dismissed. We look from a material perspective and economic perspective, but I think from the spirituality of immigrants, you can learn so much. And I myself learn so much when I hear to the stories of Syrian refugees. In Turkey we have right now 3 million. And it's just the way they talk about God. I mean, with me, sometimes when I face a little bit of difficulty in my life, I tend to be in a state of weakness. But then you see people who have so much resilience, and then who can provide, who actually make you able to see from a greater perspective on life, which is amazing, I think.
Yeah, I think just another aspect in the Islamic theology concerning immigration is that, in a sense, everyone is an immigrant in this world. So Islam actually, there is a lot of emphasis that, this is about the nature of this world, that it's not a temporary, it's not a permanent, but, temporary. We should always be aware of the fact that, in a sense, we are an immigrant here. And then there is a lot of emphasis to remember death, that one day we will face death, in a way to emphasize that, humankind should not be very attached to this world. Because one of the reasons actually sometimes we give, hard time to our fellow human beings is because of our attachments. So actually Islamic theology comes to, in a way, to challenge this attachment, to emphasize that, don't think that you are here eternally, but this is a permanent transitionary place. So in a sense, we all are immigrants.
So you both teach in Christian contexts. And I know in the Christian church there's a lot of anxiety in the West and in North America about Christendom falling away and the majority kind of established nature of Christianity slipping away. And so what wisdom do you all think that Islam has to teach Christianity about what it's like to be a religion on the margins and a minority faith?
I think, first of all, this anxiety, I think it has no, first of all, to be in dialogue right now is so enriching for faith communities. If you let the other in, whoever the other is, I mean, there are actually studies which we've done at our Episcopal Seminary, which show that those communities who are engaged in interfaith dialogue are actually more flourishing. Because once you are in a situation where you have to explain your theology to a Muslim neighbor, or a Muslim or a Buddhist asks you, so tell me, how do you think about this issue? Then you're like, oh, I never actually thought about this. Or I actually never thought about this in a deeper way, or in a way that really makes sense to others. And then, I mean, it's a reality that half of the globe, they don't embrace Islam. They don't embrace Christianity. So how can I explain my tradition in a way which makes sense to the other person, right? And so it becomes then the fact that actually in the process of dialogue, I deepen my own faith. So when you actually, maybe that's God's wisdom why there's so much diversity. The Quran says, it's actually, I have created you in nations and tribes so that you may know one another. It's actually to get a greater self-knowledge of who you are. You become more self-conscious. In my journey of studying dialogue and being in dialogue with others in Germany or here, I always realized that God makes me actually a better Muslim through the other person. Because they ask me, why are you Muslim? why do you wear a scarf? Why do you fast? Why do you pray 5 times a day? And in that process, I become more self-aware. I had to critically engage with my tradition. I had to reflect deeper. I couldn't just imitate what my forefathers did, right? And I came from a background where my parents are not educated formally. I mean, they never went to school. My mother is illiterate. And I'm not saying that because to belittle that. I'm very proud of my background. But I'm saying, if you are confident in your faith, you have no issue with other faith traditions dialoguing with you, because you are rooted, you know. And out of that rootedness, you can open up. You don't have to compromise or negotiate the integrity of your faith. And I think there is a lot of anxiety in both communities for that, because we have a lack of confidence, Muslims and Christians. And when there's a lack of confidence, you're always suspicious about the other. Is he coming to convert me? Is he coming to evangelize? That's all fine, let him come, you know. Let him argue with that. If you are not rooted, then maybe that's a good way for you to become rooted. And so I think we can get rid of that anxiety if we are able to open up to other faith communities. And I always see in my classes, when Christian students reflect about Muslim prayer or the act of fasting, they actually become deepen in their own tradition. They always rediscover something that they have maybe neglected, you know. And me too.
Right? So what do you find that they find that they've neglected the most? Like, what's the most common?
In the Christian context? Yeah. I mean, actually my research focuses on, you know, religion in secular context. So basically the challenges of the faithful community. I do lots of studies about so the situation of Muslim community in a secular context. And I think in a sense, I see the challenges are very similar. I mean, in terms of, you know, you said the anxiety in the Christian community, in the secular context, this being in Europe and in America. For example, one of the major challenges is how really present faith to the millennials, right? It is a challenge. And I think it is a challenge of all faith communities. You know, we have lots of distractions. This is the age of iPhones, iPads, you know, digital media, or spirituality without religion, you know, without institution. So I think this is you know, I see this is a major challenge in the West. Although the process of this challenge is slower in the Muslim communities, but actually they are facing the same issue. So this might be, I think, one of the area that the faith communities, they can work together. But I see that this is actually a major issue now. How can we present faith, religion, spirituality to the millennials in a way that they can buy it?
It makes me really happy to know that the millennials drive you crazy too.
Yeah,
like
of course.
that's
I think this is everywhere. Yeah.
I think we need to be aware that we are one human family facing the common spiritual threats, like, you know, the subtle, aggressive promotion of atheism. That, you know, sometimes it's just like how God is not. I remember from Georgetown, we had Muslims and Christians. We had actually a group of mixed students from different faith backgrounds, and they all said how they felt marginalized in the classroom because of the subtle atheism. I mean, they could never even bring God into the conversation. You know, it's like, let's not talk about God. I mean, this is Georgetown University. It has a religious background. You are Christian and Muslim, and you can talk about God in a rational way in the classroom, whether it's economics, whether it's biology or physics, whether, you know, you name it. And I think this is where we are still so busy with ourselves. We don't see that, wait a minute, where can we actually form an alliance where we help our younger generation be able to step into a larger discourse where they feel, you know, it makes sense to believe in God, and it also makes sense to bring him into the public discourse on immigration and, you know, other, you know, discourses. So I think that's where we sometimes, when I see Muslims, Christians argue, we went to a conference in Tanzania where we had Christians and Muslim leaders, just a simple example, and they were fighting over slaughtering, you know, rituals, and who is going to have the hegemony about who's going to slaughter the meat. I'm like, people wake up, you know. we have youth who are struggling to believe in God, and some of the older generation is talking about halal meat and who's going to slaughter it and this and that. So this is a simple example how you can get lost in trivialities. But you need to be able, I'm not saying it's not important, but if 90% of your daily life becomes just surrounded by for this issue, there's a problem, I think. You know, you don't know what is really the challenge of your time.
I think that's a good point for Christians that we waste a lot of energy thinking that Islam is the problem, when really secularism poses a bigger challenge to both of us, and that we should see you as friends in that. But that's
still in the middle of competition, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, generally, if you look at the religious landscape around the globe, we see more than half of our globes they still either part of Islam or Christianity. But actually, in reality, I mean, we have lots of numbers, but when it comes to really faith discourse, I mean, I will say belief is a minority thing now, and then it is a challenge. We have big numbers, but I think the reality is it's a minority.
Yeah, and I think it's a helpful frame because like Steve, the crazy guy who came in with the chef costume, I remember when he went to Egypt right before the uprising, and I remember him telling me that going through the museum in Cairo, there's this big tablet on display, and there's just a little asterisk at the bottom of the tablet, and it just offhandedly mentions that at some point a group of Israelites escaped from Egypt. What is one of the core stories for all of our traditions?
Right.
On the radar of history was just a little blip.
And that's something which we probably, if we make half of the globe, Christians and Muslims, why don't we have in our classes courses like a history of Christian-Muslim relations, concord and conflict? Where were things in our history where we actually flourished together? And where were times of conflict and how we dealt with it, and how can that maybe inform our lives today? Zero,
Yeah, because most Christians have no idea that without Islam, there's no Thomas Aquinas.
Even Muslims don't do, like what I've mentioned about, like how many episodes we have about coexistence and cooperation, and like if you just think of St. John of Damascus. I mean, he was a Christian theologian working in the Muslim administration, and he wrote this treatise,
in 8th century, right?
8th century.
Yeah.
And he wrote this amazing treatise, The Heresy of the Ishmaelites, which is a critique, a theological critique on Muslims, about Muslims. And he was able to write this. But why don't we reflect upon, there was a Christian who was able to theologically challenge Muslim majority administration.
And working for them.
And working for them, and he was not killed, So that these things were happening. And why are sometimes, today Muslims are getting nervous about when a church is built, and Christians are getting nervous when a mosque is built, right? So I think we need to focus on teaching ourselves and our younger generation about this history. Where did it go well? Where did it go wrong? And we need to do, because we don't have the luxury to ignore it. So
I think it's a helpful reminder what you said, that so the Israelites are in Egypt, and because of Joseph, they serve a function. That there was a utilitarian reason for them helping the Egyptians. And then once Joseph is gone and that usefulness disappears, Pharaoh no longer sees them as actual people.
Right.
And then once Pharaoh stops seeing them as actual people, that's when God decides to act.
There's actually a term people point about historical amnesia. We all forget that we all were living at the margins, that we're all marginal people at one point in history. And now we think, now we are the majority, and now we can decide who comes in and who is out, who benefits us. As a faith believer, you never look at how someone benefits you. You just do it out of your faith to God, right? And there's sometimes what we say, reciprocity, where sometimes in Europe people say, okay, we grant Muslims these rights, but we want the Muslims also to grant Christians the rights. Of course I would love for Christians to have the same rights, but this is not the right thing to model, to say, if I do this for you, will you do it for me too? I mean, I understand that it's important that other countries also, are on the boat with this, but what if they don't do? Will I always measure my actions according to their actions?
Mm-hmm.
I have to always, set the bar higher and think, I will do my best and I'll, do it, I will sacrifice my life so that people have a better life, but if they don't show me the same kind of action, it really doesn't matter to me, because I know that God notices what I'm doing. And this is something which comes from both communities, argument of reciprocity, like you do and then I do, or I did and that's why you have to do it. I think this is not something suitable for believers. They shouldn't act this way.
Mm-hmm. And I think especially for Christians, the idea of making yourself vulnerable to the other person is important for us. So,
I think there's always a temptation to forget that we're all, as Salih said, we are all immigrants in this world. We all will depart, and the question is how do we spend this life on earth? And we neglect that we are travelers. We are moving every second. We are moving. I see the wrinkles on my face coming, and God is saying, you are moving, you're also departing from this world.
There is a beautiful verse in the Quran. It says, you will never reach to the high level of faith unless you want what you want for yourself, also you want for your fellow believers. If you don't want the same thing for your fellow believers, that means you are not on the on the ideal level of faith.
mm-hmm.
So I think this is kind of the the tone. What does it mean to be a faithful person? And then the idea is that really just to what you love for yourself, love for your fellow human beings as well. Otherwise, there is a problem with our faith.
Yeah.
And I know it's a challenging thing. It is really challenging. And again, in the Quran, it says, when you want to give, don't give the things that you don't use it, or it doesn't benefit you anymore. Give the things that you really love.
You mean you're not supposed to give 5-year-old canned food?
Exactly. do from what you love. And again, it is really challenging. It is easy for me to give, to donate a jacket that I don't wear anymore. Really, can I donate, to things that I really love? And it is really a great test for faith.
So in the spirit of interreligious dialogue, if you were about to speak to a group of people before you took up an offering, what would you tell them before you asked them to give their money? I'm just joking. Would you thank them for their time?
Okay, thank you. I really did a good job.
They will be at a reception out here in the lobby after the service. If the ushers would come in to receive the gifts of God's people. Oh, last word, okay.
Another verse, it says, in the context of giving, they give, addressing the believers, they give when they are in prosperity, but they also give when they are in difficulty.
So no excuses.
No excuse.
But also, I want to add something too. We talked about this in the cupboard. There's a beautiful tradition which says, the prophet came home and he asked his wife, what is left from that lamb that was given to us? And she said, I have given, nothing is left from it for us except this piece of leg. And he said, oh, you mean everything stayed with us, everything was kept with us except this leg. So our perception is when we give, it's gone. But actually the perception here is when we give, it's eternalized. You put it on your eternal investment account and it's eternal and it's yours, It's not gone. And this is, I think, the perception why it's hard for people to give. They think, when I give, it's gone. No, it's actually, you put it on your eternal bank account, It's yours in your pocket. So in that spirit, give.
And that's good. I mean, that's good. I mean, because
I love it because it just
yeah.
it counters my thinking, because my ego says, oh, if I give, it's gone. But no, it's actually for me. I give it for me, and I detach myself from this world.
Because you can tell in the Exodus passage that it's Pharaoh's anxiety of scarcity that prompts the abuse of the Israelites, and so that willingness to see that there's enough is what behind hospitality.
Sorry for.
Oh, they're used to me going on and on, so you're fine. You're fine.
Right.
Would you thank them?
Thank you.
Thank you.